This is the Free Heel Life Podcast, episode number 174. I'm your host, Josh Madsen, coming at you from the Free Heel Life shop in Salt Lake City, Utah. And welcome back. Happy Monday, friends and family and fellow protectors of the turn. Good to be back, and always enjoy kicking off the week with a new podcast. I've got a great guest today, but before that, let's talk about some business side of the house in some newsroom and notes. The retail front is closed for the season. We finished up on Friday, and it was a wonderful, wonderful retail year, finishing out our 8th season with the Free Heel Life retail shop. So thank you, everybody that supported us there. We are obviously still open online 24/7, and we are happy to send out what's left in the shop. There are a couple things left on the website. We've gone through, kind of cleaned everything up. Should be pretty easy to find what you need, and we appreciate all of the support. We are going to be taking both phone and in-store appointments moving forward, and you can book those directly at customer service at freeheellife.com, and we would encourage you to go there. We are not going to be checking the support desk every single day like we do during the season, but you can reach out to us there, and we will intermittently be checking it. And we will be checking it on the daily just for shipping stuff. So if you do order something from us, something goes wrong during the ordering process, you have a question, you need help, we do check that to make sure we're catching those before we send stuff out the door. So be sure to do that. freeheellife.com all summer long. And we'll probably keep up a little on the social media as well. If we put out any merch in the summer and stuff like that. So thank you, everybody. Been awesome. I think that pretty much wraps up newsroom and notes in terms of what's going on. Appointment only. We're closing down for the summer, even though it's an incredible year. But we are going to take advantage of some skiing as well. Hopefully you will be doing the same thing. We are definitely going to be probably top season ever here in Utah. So why not get out and do some skiing here in April? So my guest today is from New Mexico, where he grew up and went to school. As a high schooler, and when the snow was lousy at his local resort, he used to pull out a pair of 210 Tua skis mounted with flimsy Voile telemark bindings and then strap on a pair of thrift shop leather telemark boots. And this is how he got started in telemark skiing many years ago. He's worked as a journalist for the likes of Powder Magazine, Ski, Outside, Wire, and many more over the years. But it was his recent piece in Ski titled "Everyone Should Own a Telemark Setup" that caught my attention. We had a great conversation of what drives people to telemark ski, how it looked back when both of us started versus now, and maybe where it's heading. So I had a great conversation, and I hope you'll enjoy this one. Please welcome to the podcast, Jacob Schiller. All right, Jacob, welcome to the Free Heel Life Podcast, man. Thanks for being here.
So excited to be here. Thanks for having me, man.
Yeah, I'm stoked. I always like these conversations. We chatted for a quick second before we started recording, but I always like these conversations where I don't know people at all because it's kind of unfolding as we do it.
Well, happy to cue you in on all that is Jacob Schiller, not, the little world that is.
Yeah, well, and the way you came on my radar was whenever somebody publishes anything about telemark in another sort of, larger snow publication, literally like text messages, DMs, it's like, hey, did you read this? So, that's kind of, I want to get into that a little bit, working for Ski Magazine and all that stuff. But, tell me a little bit about yourself. Where do you live and what exactly, are you a full-time journalist and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, cool. I live in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And I was a full-time sort of outdoor journalist. I was an editor at Outside for 3.5 years. And then I've been a columnist for them ever since. So I've been with Outside. I freelanced, and then I was an editor, and then I've been freelancing again as a columnist. So I've been with Outside for about a decade. And I did work for Powder kind of as a freelancer as well here and there. Really loved the Powder crew and have great memories of working with those guys. And then when Outside acquired Ski, I started working for Ski as well. And love Sierra, the editor there. She's great. And yeah, I've always, grew up skiing and I've always had a passion for skiing. Kind of had a dip during college. I was in California, didn't get to ski much. But I've always, just loved writing about it. And I think the piece you're referring to came out online in Ski, just, talking. I think the headline was something like why everyone should own a telemark setup. And just, trying to, as somebody who's written about skiing and who's written about gear for a long, long time, it's sort of like, how do we move beyond just you should buy these skis or buy these boots, and sort of talk about really think about how people's lives can be made better by gear or by an activity, and really trying to meet people where they are, and like sort of thinking about where I am as a skier and as a journalist and how I can be most helpful to them. So that's sort of like the basis of that piece.
No, I love that, man. So then are you from Albuquerque originally, or is that kind of just where you ended up?
No, born and raised in a little town called Placitas, which is just north of Albuquerque. And so I'm 42, and, I don't want to get on a soapbox, but I mean, I was, I started skiing when I was, 5 or 6, back when there was actually snow down here. I mean, I think we're definitely on the front lines of climate change in New Mexico. Winter here used to be November to, March. Now it's January to April. I mean, weird things are going on. We actually have quite a bit of snow here right now. But it takes a while. But yeah, I grew up skiing, and it's actually an interesting story. And just cut me off at any point, okay? I don't want to blabber.
No, this is great.
Sound good?
No, this is awesome.
Cool. So I grew up, my parents are hippies, they would call themselves more like political radicals. That I don't think they identify per se as hippies. But I grew up in Placitas, New Mexico, which was kind of a rural town north of Albuquerque. And one of the ways they supported themselves was by my mom and my dad, but mostly my mom, wrote, produced, and published hiking and skiing guides, cross-country skiing guides and hiking guides to the Sandia Mountains, which are right outside Albuquerque, and some of the other mountains, like the mountains up in near Santa Fe. And then my mom also taught continuing education cross-country skiing classes. So, as a kid, I got to go on those classes. And it was a mixed bag. And as a kid, I was like, oh God, do I have to go on these? Do I have to go skiing? With you? But there was a lot of enjoyment out there, and she taught me a lot about being outside and enjoying the snow and learning how to ski. And so, I don't hold that against my mom at all. I actually thank my mom really deeply for, teaching me to love skiing. But it wasn't like we weren't telemarking, we weren't downhill skiing. We were just, skiing the trails of the Sandia Mountains. But as a kid, I started to pay attention to what was going on. I saw other people, doing this thing called telemarking. And I was like, wow, what is that? You know what I mean? And instead of just like having to like climb the uphill part, or ski out the fire road or whatever, and do the exercise, which, my mom and her class enjoyed because they were getting exercise and they were adults. I was like, ugh, you know what I mean? I fuck this. I want the down. I want the fun. I want the whatever. And so I remember there was a big meadow on top of the Sandia Mountains, and the Sandia Mountains are like 10,000 feet. So they're, the pitches, they're not the Wasatch. They're not very steep, but they are tall. But there's a big meadow on the top, and we used to ski through that meadow. And as my mom's class would, ski around, I would, just on my rinky-dink cross-country skis, I don't think they even had metal edges, floppy boots. I would just, mimic these telemark guys that I was seeing, and drop my knee and do what I could. It was a mess and it was impossible and it was hard, but I was just like, that, I want to go downhill. I do not want to just be, skiing flat or uphill or whatever. And so, I had it in my mind, and I remember the Sandia ski area, which there is a ski area on the backside of the Sandias, which unfortunately is probably going to close because of climate change, just because we cannot get reliable snow and they don't want to make snow and et cetera. But I remember we skied out this fire road that connects with the ski area. And, my mom was like, okay, well, we can like go down a little bit. And it was terrifying on, little cross-country skis and being an 8-year-old or a 10-year-old. But, I wanted to conquer that. And so it was inside of me. I knew that was fun. I knew that's what I wanted to do. And so, again, big shout out to my mother, who I deeply want to thank for, again, teaching me how to ski, teaching me how to cross-country ski and getting me outside of the mountains. But then fast forward to high school, we actually moved up near Taos. Everybody knows Taos for the one amazing ski area that's up there. But I was another rural town near a ski area called Sipapu, and you guys should Google Sipapu. It's a great little Sipapu. It's a great little home hill owned by a family. Interestingly enough, my parents got in a political fight with the owners because they were trying to expand, and my parents didn't want them to expand, but that's a whole nother story. But I had the advantage of I went to a high school where every Wednesday they could let us out at like 10 o'clock and they would bus us to the ski area. And we got, I think, a lesson in rentals and, most of a day of skiing for $15 or something. So I then learned how to downhill ski. And, because I had cross country skiing under my belt, I got, I was pretty good at downhill skiing pretty quickly. I understood what to do. And so that was sort of the next chapter. This was probably middle school, beginning of high school. But then, as I'm sure many people do, in high school, I wasn't rebellious. I got busted for graffiti for 10 days. That was the biggest thing I ever did. But I was a pretty good kid. I got good grades. I got straight A's, but I still wanted to be rebellious. And so how do you be rebellious as a skier? You telemark, right? You're just like, oh, you know what I mean? I'm not going to do this downhill shit anymore. You know what I mean? I'm going to, it was, or snowboarding, right? And then snowboarding sort of blew up and I started to snowboard a little bit, but telemarking was the first rebellion, whatever, I'm going to do something different. I'm not going to I'm going to listen to hip hop and punk rock and I'm going to telemark. And so the only way to do that, this is the early 90s probably, and you can probably fill me in on the gear here. I might be, my timeline isn't perfect, but I was, just some high school kid with hippie parents, and so I was not getting the best and the brightest gear, and so we were able to like scrounge up some old leather Solo boots, with the yellow laces, which I'm sure people remember. And then I think we had a pair of Tua 210, Josh, what do you think those were underfoot? 75 or something?
Yeah, like 65, something like that. Yeah, 70 max.
Right. Right. And then a pair of those first Volet bindings, you know what I mean? That, that went around the back of the boot, and I would ski a couple runs as a downhill kid. And then I would get on my leather boots and my Tua 210s and just proceed to like survive down the hill. But I found it to be super fun. And, and it was a attention grab for sure. I was like, oh, yo, look at me, and you'd ski under the lift. The run under the lift was called Gamble, and it never pitched that steep, but it was a black. And, you're definitely just like survival skiing, but, everybody's like, what the hell is that kid doing? And so it was an attention draw and it was rebellious, but it was fun. And it was a challenge, and I think I say in my piece for ski that like, on the really bad days, that's when I would actually pull out the tele skis, because it was just so much more fun to ski bad snow on tele gear because it was a challenge. So, I did that. And then, I also downhill skied. I snowboarded for a little while, but then, all my friends started doing, cliff jumps and 720s, and I couldn't keep up and I didn't want to break my arm. So I just continued to tele. And then I went to college in California, and Tahoe was 4 hours away. I didn't have a car, so I didn't go very often, but I did. Oh, actually, and I mentioned this in the piece, probably between my freshman and sophomore year of college, I went on the classic backpack trip around Europe with my cousin, and we slept on trains and went all over the place. But I was in like a thrift store or some secondhand store in Italy, and I found a pair of a Solo. You've probably seen them. Do you know what they were called? They're like, they only kind of came above your ankle. Do you know what those boots were called?
You had a Solo Extreme, which was the yellow. You had Snowfields, and Extremes had just laces. Then you had like a Solo Extreme Plus had a couple buckles. I don't know if you had buckles on them, but is that what you're talking about, or just lace ups?
Yeah. It might have been just lace-ups, but they were plastic, you know what I mean? And they weren't, I think Scarpa had launched, the T1, T2, T3 line by then, but I was a college student again. I was broke. I didn't have the money. It wasn't actually I was concentrating on other things. But yeah, some Solo boot that was plastic, but it barely went above my ankle, and they weighed, a shit ton. But I was like, I just was in love. I was like, it was my first plastic boot. I knew this was like going to change things for me. And so I carried those around Italy, and then I called them back on like a 40-hour train ride from Italy back to Spain, and just like held those things dear to me, and then brought them back to Europe, and brought them back from Europe, brought them to California. And then, and I can't remember how I got a better pair of skis, but I got a pair of like Fisher skis that were probably like, I don't know, 95 underfoot or whatever. So we're getting there. I have sort of plastic boots. I have, a little bit bigger ski. And then every time I would go to Tahoe, I would just, pull that out, and I became a better skier. And, I think I say in the piece, I was the last one down the hill because, I was not the rippingest telemarker by any means. I was okay. But, somebody who, only skis a couple of days a year, you're squatting and, after about 15 minutes, you got to take a break. So, but whatever, it was fun. And it helped me continue to identify as somebody who wasn't going to just buy into the mainstream. It made me feel good. Oh, one other quick little story that people will relate to maybe is, I think, so growing up in New Mexico, Durango is actually not that far away from us. It's about 3.5 hours away. And there's a couple of great local ski shops in Durango. I don't know what they're called. They're still there, I think. But I remember going to Durango with my family, and one of these shops had a t-shirt that said, "Free your heel, free your mind," which I don't know if that still exists, and or Josh, you should bring that back because that's amazing. And as like a 13-year-old middle schooler who again is trying to be rebellious and kind of find, like that phrase. And I remember I had this white long sleeve shirt that said "Free your heel, free your mind," and I thought that was the coolest shit ever. You know what I mean? I would give anything to have that shirt back.
I'll send you one because we made a new one this year. So I'll send you.
Yes.
It's a little levitating guy, and it says "Free heel, free mind." So you'll like it.
Okay, I love that. But anyway, yeah, it was just about identity and freedom and challenging myself and just being outside. So
no, I love that. And actually, if you had a plastic solo boot, that is the Tele Breeze, which funny enough is why they quit making telemark boots after that, because they recalled every single one of those boots because they broke.
Really?
So, yeah, totally. So
what was breaking? Do you remember?
So those were funny because when they made the plastic boot, the plastic was actually pretty soft. And so instead of having the bellow over the toe area so you could flex it, they had put like a single bellow between the toe of the boot and the 75 millimeter toe. So there was a compression point, and then it actually had a hinged toe, and that hinged toe would break. But yeah, no, that was actually an that boot actually had some interesting, it actually had a tension bar that ran through the length of the boot. And from my understanding, you could actually create a stiffer or a softer boot by adjusting that bar throughout the length of the boot. So there was some cool stuff. They just never kept going after that recall.
Yeah. Well, it changed my life. And again, we've all been there. I don't know. I'm totally, because I was a gear editor at Outside, I get, and my garage is now stuffed with stuff, but we all remember that. I still remember the first anorak I got, right? It was I won't belabor this story, but like my grandma used to shop at TJ Maxx, and she sent me some jacket I didn't really like, and we exchanged the jacket at TJ Maxx, and I got $100. And we were in Colorado visiting my other grandma, and there was some outdoor store, and I walked over and I got a purple pullover anorak Columbia, and it changed my life because I finally had a waterproof jacket that I could just go out. I don't know. It's just one of those little things where you're like, this makes a big difference in my ability to be outside.
No, I love that. No, it's so interesting because what's cool is I didn't realize you kind of had that history with telemark, and I think you kind of hit on, Sipapu still has a strong telemark scene. Angel Fire does, Taos, New Mexico's. As you live there, but it's kind of off the radar a little bit, or has been in the past, and but they've always had a good telemark scene. And I think the things you're touching on that are interesting to me is sort of that the counterculture of the 90s and kind of early 2000s of telemark is always really interesting to me. And even like you said, like what kind of music you were listening to, and sort of it was something. It wasn't snowboarding, but it was kind of this thing that was acceptable as sort of an outsider sort of thing. And I don't know, that's changed a lot, since then. But that's cool that you got to experience that, because I think that's an important part of sort of the evolution of telemarketers, but doesn't necessarily, it kind of exists now, but maybe for different reasons. But I don't know if you felt that back when you were a kid, but it felt like a telemarketer in the 90s, it was sort of like pretty respectable thing to do. Like you'd see those old timers out there, and not all old timers. I can think of some guys in Taos that were ripping back in that era, but I don't know. What do you think has changed with that? Like why did it because we were talking just before we got on, it's kind of shifted a lot, and that it's not really like a cool thing to do as much as it was back then. I mean, do you sense that now kind of coming back to it? Or I guess, I don't know. Does that make sense what I'm saying? Like sort of that counterculture vibe, like rebellion, that idea. Like, I don't think people really look at it like that anymore.
Yeah, and I'll get there. I'm going to come at that kind of a roundabout way. But yeah, I mean, I do think I wasn't trying to be a punk. I wasn't trying to be, and by punk, I mean like pain in the ass. I wasn't trying to like make people uncomfortable by telemarking. It was just a way. Yeah, exactly. Like, I mean, if you're going to express, I mean, I'm a 42-year-old dad. I have 4 kids now. I mean, the oldest one is 10. I know it's coming. I mean, my 10-year-old girl is already finding ways to tell me to, back off or just to shove it. You know what I mean? And so I think that, for me, if telemarketing was my way of saying like, I'm distinguishing myself, I'm creating my own identity, I'm also listening to 90s hip hop, I'm listening to punk rock, whatever, the Beastie Boys, that was a pretty decent way of expressing myself. You know what I mean? And if my kids want to be telemarketers as a way to distinguish themselves, more power to them. And so, yeah, I did have this like rebellious thing for me, but it also just like, I don't want it to be like it'd be interesting if this guy, his name is Rico Molesky. Hey, Rico, if you ever listen to this, I don't know where Rico is, but Rico he lives in Washington now, I think. He's this guy, who some people used to call him Jesus because, long hair, long beard, you know what I mean? All dressed in all old, wool clothing, lived in a little cabin, with no electricity, but just put down some lines in the Truchas Peaks, which are just south of Taos, that are insane on old tele gear. I mean, just ripping amazing stuff, out doing big multi-day backcountry trips before anybody was doing that kind of stuff. You know what I mean? And so this guy did incredible stuff and skied incredible lines, but was doing it because it was a way to be outside and it was a way to access the backcountry. And, like decades before backcountry skiing blew up, and I don't know, I had a lot of respect for him, and still do. And that was one of the other things was like, wow, it's like, and then we can touch on that later too, but this idea of the backcountry, which is what I still do. I mean, I probably only get 5 or 10 inbound days a year and the rest is all, either skinning up or, skiing in the backcountry. So yes, I don't know. It was this idea of exploration and identity building and doing something different and just not falling into the sort of, just to like, let me go rent. I don't want to criticize just mainstream skiing, but it wasn't for me. And so I wanted something different. But yes, coming forward, I was at, my kids all had lessons at Ski Santa Fe for 6 weeks in a row. And there was a demo day or a tele day at Santa Fe. And I'm not being critical here either, but there wasn't a person under 50 on tele skis. I skinned up that day and I skied by and these guys the tele people were all hanging out. And I told them the joke, hey, how many telemarkers does it take to screw in a light bulb? 1 to screw in the light bulb and, 2 to say, nice turns, bro. And like, no one laughed. I was like, oh, come on. I'm not making fun of you guys. I'm like trying to be part of your community here. But they were just sort of like taking it very seriously. So I don't know. Go for it.
Oh no. Well, it's interesting because and I think you hit on, I think the way I was describing it, even as you responded, it brings up exactly. See, that's why I got into telemark too, is I got into it because it was more, I was 14 when I started and I'm 44. We're kind of the same era, and it's like, I don't know if I thought of it as like rebellious as much as you said expression. It was the same thing for me. Like the music I was getting into at the time, it was just like a time thing, right? Like I was like, end of junior high school, going into high school. And for me, it really was just like more of an expression thing. Honestly, it's like, wow, here's this weird thing. It's old and funky. And, I guess maybe that's what I was trying to hit on, less of like, I'm going to rebel against the establishment. I don't know, and I've always kind of gravitated to that. I've always said like telemarketers are more like a personality choice than anything. It's like the guy that wants to be the bass player in the band instead of the lead guitar player. He's like, no, I'm going to play this, I'm going to do this instead of like the thing everybody wants to be, but no, I can vibe on that a lot. And if, you brought up that Rico guy, like, I love that. I was seeing guys like that too. And I was only a resort skier, I telemarked.
Right.
And I think that influenced a lot of my perspective on what telemark was. I only looked at it as a downhill technique from the beginning of it. I never even considered it 14 or 15 years old. Like I was, I knew I could go hike and I knew the maps in the backcountry shop were there, but I didn't have a beacon, shovel, probe, and a partner to like go tromp around the Wasatch with, so it became more about the turn. And that's really what I fell in love with, was the challenge and how to get better. And of course, staying with your friends. I actually was a crappy snowboarder, which was what led me back to the skis in the first place. So, it's funny. Yeah. I want to get into that a little bit. What you said, like making jokes. It's funny because it's almost, I think because of the cultural shift is now the jokes, it's like nobody has a sense of humor. I shouldn't say nobody. I mean, that's a broad brush, but it's hard. I think people are so protective of things now. Like they're so afraid that people are bagging on them that because they're trying to kind of protect the identity of it. And it's funny because it's like dudes our age and older, there's not like this, there's some young groups out there, but it's definitely, it's just a different time. So I don't know. Anyways, that's cool. I appreciate you sharing kind of that early stuff because I think you experienced probably a similar thing to me, and same thing, old gear, just kind of like trying to figure it out, trying to find stuff that worked, and then sort of evolving the gear, as you could find it. So that's good.
Yeah. And, I think that's my whole life. I mean, I don't want to go too far here, but it is sort of a metaphor for who I am because, I was raised by these sort of political radicals / hippies, but then I came out and went to college and moved to California, and my political identity is definitely similar to theirs. And you know what I mean? I try and live a fairly simple life, but I'm much more mainstream than my parents. You know what I mean? I lead a much more sort of typical middle-class life, and I, helped start a business and, do a bunch of different things. But I've always sort of like never been able to just like buy completely into it. I've never been able to just buy into like, okay, well, I'm just going to, just kind of jump on, and I'm not criticizing again here, but like, I just have never been able to live a sort of normal life. You know what I mean? I always have some side project or some side thing going on that I think keeps me excited or is not just about like my work or whatever it is. And I think telemarketing is that. It's like, it's skiing, it's at the resort, but it's different. It's like, it's a challenge. It's a physical challenge. It's a technical challenge. And then it opens up the backcountry. And that's why I've always loved the backcountry, because it's like, I tell people, even if I'm a dad, so I don't get a lot of days, but if I get, 20 to 30 days a season, you know what I mean? I bet you I still have fewer vertical feet than somebody who gets 2 big days at Taos or, at Alta, you know what I mean? Because I just am not lapping chairs. I'm doing backcountry runs, or I'm skinning up the ski area a couple times while my kids in ski lessons. And I don't know, it's also just like a relationship with, the gear, a relationship with the mountain, a relationship with my, physicality. I don't know. I'm not being super articulate about it, but it's always sort of been a middle way of dealing with it. But I mean, I'm really surprised that it's not, well, who knows? I think and I don't want to jump too far forward here, but I end the article by saying it's coming back. You know what I mean? And maybe I've lost touch. Maybe I'm a 42-year-old guy who just has no idea what's going on and can't read the minds of the 20-year-olds. But why would it not come back? I mean, it's just this like exciting, challenging, fun, beautiful, graceful way of being at a resort or in the backcountry. And you know what I mean? People are always looking for that kind of challenge. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think just talking to you, and like I said, we've never even talked before, but like talking and hearing sort of how you're analyzing just how you live life. I've always said that a lot of people have gotten into telemark, I think, because they're those types of people. And, that's why I always say it leans to a certain personality. I think what was interesting about from the mid 70s when it came back into vogue through backcountry skiing, a lot of people kind of got into it for that reason, like this Rico guy. And a lot of these people may have loved the telemark turn, but they were also, I think some of them were personality driven, and then some of them were really like, hey, I need lightweight gear because I want to go do these objectives and get into the backcountry. Your story reminds me a lot more of myself, where it was sort of like, probably adolescence played into it, music, like just wanting to be different, wanting a challenge. And I've always said telemarks, it's very, especially nowadays, I think it's very apparent that it's very much a craft, you know. It's something that it's kind of a side hustle in its own way. Like it's a infinite challenge of perfection, you know, like you're never ever going to figure out everything. And when you do, you know, like I talk a lot about skiing on vintage gear. You know, I make all the guys and girls that work for me ski vintage gear so they can understand it, because there's all these cool little nuances to the different eras of telemark, you know, and it makes it fun. It's all the same turn. It's all telemark, but it offers those little things to work on. And I agree with you. I think it's going to come back. And I guess to answer your question, why, maybe what has held it back is a lot, you know, my whole philosophy on the business of telemark has always been, for the last, I'd say 15 years for sure, and it was kind of leading this direction before, is we never really had our own industry in the sense of like companies that support that culture and support that community and support the equipment in the way that the larger snow sports community is. And I kind of relate where we're at right now, like what we're doing with Free Heel Life. I love snowboard history, you know, and like snowboarding in the late 80s is kind of, even though we've been around a long, long time as telemark skiers, and there's been all sorts of iterations of equipment and companies involved and whatnot, we're kind of at this stage where it's like, I really feel like in order for it to come forward, we've got to have brands that actually identify with that particular type of skiing directly. Like they're not just dabbling in it, like they really understand the culture, you know, so that like, I feel like that's where I was getting with the joke thing. It's like, you know, a company like me, if I made that, well, I mean, we don't really go that route, but it's like, I feel like people would lighten up a little bit because they would know that really we're serious about those people. You know what I mean? And that's what fascinated me. Like when I saw your article, it was one of the few ones I've seen in the mainstream snow world that actually kind of vibed with my philosophy. I was like, I should reach out to this guy. Like that's more in line with what I'm thinking and have for a long time. And yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but it's yeah, I think it's a resurgence. I think the equipment is the biggest dilemma, equipment and instruction, access, you know, like a lot of things in the world. So
totally. And I agree. I mean, you're right. I mean, there's been a lot of major companies that have created gear, but it's just like a side project or whatever. There's not like a culture around it. So that's really insightful. And I mean, and one of the things we had talked about maybe even before we jumped on the actual interview was this idea that people are critical of telemarketing or like want to make fun. I mean, you know, and that joke makes fun of telemarketing, but you know, and like I'm telling it, so I feel like I own it. But I mean, I'm shocked. Why would anybody criticize telemark? I mean, what's wrong with whatever? I mean, we're not in your way. We're not like, you know, spewing toxic gas. You know what I mean? Like why would anybody have any criticism of some sport that has an incredible history, that's really fucking hard, that's graceful and beautiful, and that is like probably recycling more skis than, you know what I mean? And, you know, recycling, I don't know. I mean, there's like 1,000 things I can think of that are positive and not one that's negative.
Well, I'll tell you what it is, dude. There's two narratives going on here. So what's happened is there's one narrative that there's a single evolutionary plane of skiing. Okay. And then there's the second narrative, which is more where I align with, is telemark in its own evolutionary plane, you know, and it separates the two out. And so the first one is most people in snow sports media, let's say, just to kind of make it generic, they because telemark was how people got into the backcountry, a lot of people put it on that evolutionary plane that in the mid 70s, you basically had this lightweight Nordic gear, which actually historically is a back step from where it was in the 1860s. That's a whole nother conversation. But American freeheelers actually went backwards in that equipment. It actually wasn't as good as what they had 100 years before, which is kind of funny in and of itself. But what happened is that, you know, then it becomes sort of this backcountry thing. People like you and I got into it in the resort, but that was definitely the minority. And so like when AT started building up momentum, and really it was, the big one was when probably, you know, 2009, 2010, Dynafit's patent comes up, and it allows everyone to start working on tech toe technology. And I think what's happened is culturally in the larger snow ski world specifically is now telemark almost looks like an archaic Cro-Magnon version of skiing, as if it didn't like, why haven't you evolved into something like a Tecto AT technology? And that's sort of that narrative. And it's sort of what it's done is it's sort of alienated telemark. And the fact that we didn't have brands that the minute that happened, it started happening in the mid 2000s, is you had really badass telemark companies like Karhu. Like that's the big one. I mean, it was like legit awesome telemark equipment. It vibed, good graphics. Like it was literally kind of, like I say, like it's like a snowboard brand. Like it supported the community and the people that did it. But even they ended up transitioning into this thing where now it was not a telemark ski, even though it's a ski, right? Like it, that's a ski is a ski, but the binding and the boot are different. And what they started doing is marketing now, like it's a telemark and AT ski. And that era was sort of this weird transition where, that particular company ended up getting sold to K2 with Line, and because Line and Karhu were owned by the same company. And then, K2 gets it and shuts down probably, in my opinion, one of the most iconic telemark brands ever, just gone. Doesn't even exist anymore, and continued with Line. Anyways, all to say is, I think to answer your question is that's what has been pushed, is this idea that people that are still telemarking haven't figured out that they're an unevolved species on skis. And it's fucking ridiculous, dude. It makes no sense, because someone like me, and I'm a traditionalist in the sense of, I look at the narrative of telemark, coming from the 1860s all the way to now. And I'm like, wow, we've really come a long way. Like I don't even look at that other thing because it doesn't make any sense to me. And when you look at it like that and you sort of like isolate telemark as telemark, it really is such a different perspective. And I think that's why we're getting this sort of weird reaction to jokes, because they're being told, telemarketers that are die hard and look at it, they're like, hey, we're crushing it. Like we have really good bindings and boots now in resort and out of bounds. I mean, aside from any weight issues or stuff like that, it's like the telemarketer themselves, I think they're sort of like, whoa, like they know that the majority of people have now had it shoved down their throat, that we just never evolved. And so imagine that, like when you tell that joke and then those people are like, whoa, buddy. Like
back off.
We're good, dude. Like chill out.
You're making it worse. Yeah.
Right. So but and that's 100% why I was interested in reaching out to you. Cause it's like, oh, cool. Like this guy's actually writing in a publication, but like your philosophy on it makes a lot more sense to me, and, anyways, I'm curious, like, so when like you said you wrote for Powder, like when did you even get into the media side of writing? Because that's Powder Magazine. I'm kind of curious, just like how long you were, working with them. Like, were you an in-house writer, or were you just freelancing, or what was going on there?
Well, I'm going to answer that question, and I'm going to kind of come back to what we were just talking about too. But yeah, so I can't remember. I think I started freelancing for Powder before I became a staffer, an editor at Outside. But I think what happened was this. I think I went to college. I was politically involved. I, became a journalist, and I spent years on the road as both a writer and a photojournalist, and moved to some very beautiful and weird spots, and was just like full in on journalism. And as a journalist yourself, it's a really fulfilling career. But it's really exhausting. It doesn't pay much, and you got to be all in. And so eventually, I can't remember. I think I sort of came back and was like, okay, I'm done with journalism for a little while. I'm starting a family. I can't really, chase these stories across. I was doing traveling the world occasionally. And so I came back, I reestablished myself in New Mexico, and I realized that I can ski again now. So I was like, oh, skiing. And, and I sort of, my passion for skiing was reignited. And I think, I was smart enough or well-read enough to understand that Powder was doing great work. I mean, it was obvious that Powder was, and I'm not throwing any other publication under the bus, but they had a certain culture, a certain tone, a certain approach to all these things. And I remember I think I'd maybe written a couple things for Outside by then as a freelancer, whatever. But I sent a whatever. I don't use Twitter very much. I think I said I don't know if there's such a thing as a DM, or I just tweeted at John Davies, and shout out to John, who I love, who actually lives here in New Mexico now, and is a new dad himself. And he was the managing editor at the time of Powder. And I just said, hey, I'd love to write for you guys, or here's a couple ideas. And he was like, great, let's go for it. And we just vibed and we saw eye to eye. And I just got to know those guys. I got to know John, both John, Stifter and Davies, and the crew. And, and Sierra was there, and Julie, and Matt, sorry, I don't want to leave anybody out. And they were just an incredible crew. And anybody who knows Powder just knows that they were all in, and they were an incredible set of journalists and skiers. And I got to go to their Powder Week a couple times, which is where their week-long ski test event. I went to Jackson Hole. I went to Big Sky with them. I went to their, the Thread the Needle, which was their apparel test, which was always it was not in Little Cottonwood. It was in Big Cottonwood. What are the resorts in Big Cottonwood?
Oh, Brighton and Solitude.
Yeah, it was at Solitude. And, it had a great, and then that's where I met Dan Abrams. Shout out to Dan, who owns Fly Low. And I got to ski with him and his co-founder, and had one of my best ski days ever with those guys. This is all on downhill gear, of course, right? We were skiing downhill stuff at the time, because that was sort of how I reignited my passion for skiing. But anyway, I'm getting off on a tangent, but big shout out to those guys. It was narrative, and it was people driven, and it was about, it wasn't just about there was plenty of, I went on this adventure, but I'm more in the depth of Powder, just because they had such good journalism, and they were such good journalists, and they were such good people, and their events were amazing. You know what I mean? There were some very fun days with Powder, and some, and I built some incredible connections. And so, I guess I'll continue the thread. And, so I reignited my passion for skiing. I'm in deep. I knowing the right people. I'm not the best skier, man. I'm not, but I'm good enough to test skis. I'm out there, I'm making connections, I'm a writer, I'm sort of in the middle of all of it. And then I realized, okay, well, backcountry is the next frontier, right? I've always been interested in the backcountry, but I never really knew how to do it. So I get my Avi 1. I was also a freelancer for Wired, actually, and I ended up writing my Avi 1 story for Wired. I did an Avi 1. I managed to get Wired to let me cover an Avi 1 course. So I got my, Avi 1. And then I started looking at, sort of AT gear, because okay, well, what's the deal with AT gear? So I got to know the Dynafit people actually really well. Big shout out to Eric Henderson, who's the PR rep for Dynafit, and an actual former telemarketer. Yeah, Hendy's an amazing guy, and he's a dear friend. And so I started getting the gear, and I understood okay, well, AT gear lets me into the backcountry. I fully support. I'll be honest, my garage. I probably have 8 pairs of AT skis and 2 pairs of tele skis, just because it is that much easier on modern AT gear to get into the backcountry. I was a better skier. I was more confident when I was skiing steep stuff in the spring, and I fell in love. I was just wow, here's this identity again. Here's this place where I'm exercising really hard. I'm seeing places that I've never seen before. I'm going out. I'm having to be really careful and use my knowledge and learn how to read maps and learn how to read terrain. And I'm not skiing super high consequence terrain, but I'm out there, I'm building relationships with friends who our lives are dependent on each other, and that brings us closer, and I'm building community, and it's amazing. And, at some point in there, I'm now a staffer at Outside, and, I was still living in Albuquerque, which is an hour away, but I would get up at 4 a.m. and get ready, drive an hour, meet people at 6 o'clock in the morning, and we would skin up Ski Santa Fe and then go into work. Those were some long days, but it was great because I got a full lap in. Often days it was a Powder day. One of my favorite memories at Outside was the road hadn't been plowed. You know what I mean? We got 6 cars stuck on the side of the road at Ski Santa Fe, but 2 Toyota trucks finally made it up, and we the whole crew at Outside got first tracks at Ski Santa Fe, and it was it was a glorious day. But that's all AT gear. And so, but then and then I think I say it in the article. I had kids, and I was okay, so I want to teach my kids how to ski. I'm going to be inbounds. Skiing on downhill gear sounds about as boring as watching an ice cube melt. You know what I mean? It's just it sounds awful. So then my telemark gear gets dusted off again. You know what I mean? And I'm at Outside, so I can get anything I want to test. So of course I call in the best stuff, right? I called in the Scarpa boots and the NTN stuff from Rotafella. I think is that how you say it?
Yeah, Rotafella. Yep.
Rotafella, and I knew the kids at DPS, and so I got a lightweight pair of skis at DPS, and was just like, oh my god, like this is amazing. And I started just skiing with my kids and like relearning the value of the telemark turn and working on my technique, and just like feeling like, again, I'm not, you know what I mean, maybe I'm getting 5 days in the backcountry, and maybe I'm getting 20 or 25 days in bounds, but most of those days are just with my kids, and it takes a while. And so telemarking was just like, here I am again, you know what I mean? I'm just sort of enjoying the turn, what's his name? They do the return of the turn, which is...
Oh, Marcus Kasten.
Yeah, Marcus, exactly. But it's like the return of the telly turn, and
Sure.
So it brought joy to me. And so I want to bring that full circle. I'm rambling a little bit, but the way I think about telemarketing now is, again, my parents are sort of like old hippies, but I'm definitely part of the mainstream. And so let's use the word like capitalism. Like I cannot think about how tele is not going to blow up, and I could be very wrong. But like, how has the business world not seen the opportunity there? And then you're on it. You should be patenting the hell out of everything. I mean, you're on the front lines of this. But like, think about the comparison I wanted to make was vinyl versus Spotify, right? Like everybody's like, the old vinyl guys. Oh, get rid of your vinyl. What are you doing with vinyl? You can call up any song in the entire fucking world in 0 time on your phone and stream it through your speakers, and you're great. You know what I mean? Like, get rid of your vinyl. Telemark guy, like as you were saying, like, get on the path, get, AT and, all the new downhill stuff. Like you are an unevolved person by telemarketing. You know what I mean? But, you look at the statistics now, vinyl is outselling everybody. I mean, I'm spending hundreds of dollars on vinyl because I love the sound. I love that I have to get up from my seat when I'm at my computer and flip the record. I love that I'm buying particular albums. It's amazing. I still use Spotify. I love Spotify or whatever, but vinyl's made a huge comeback. And again, I'm not the best business person in the world, but I just see telemark as the same thing. Like, get with the times. Well, sorry, the times, you know what I mean? Whoever telemark is special, and there's something special about the turn and the gear and the movement and the communication with the hill, and it will come back, and people will realize, oh my God, you know what I mean? You're not unevolved. You're just, as you said, you're on a different path, and that path is amazing, and that path can be in communication with everything else in the ski world.
Yeah, and it's funny you brought up vinyl. I mean, I'm a huge vinyl guy too, and it kind of tying it together. I mean, a lot of what got me into telemark, I started listening to punk rock, man. But honestly, what my whole business has been based on the ethos of early 80s punk rock, because I realized, and this kind of ties to what I was saying about late 80s snowboarding and kind of tying it into what you're talking about with the business and the opportunity. What I finally realized, because I skied for Rossignol, after I skied for Karhu, like I was working with large companies, and this is like 2007. It's at this transition where people kind of seem to forget that Fisher made a telemark line, Rossignol did, Atomic did. I'm blanking to see if there's any others. I mean, you had major manufacturers making telemark equipment, but what I think happened to kind of your point of the business side is the corporatization of skiing. I'm all pro business, dude. Like I'm all about that. But I think what's happened is because we didn't have our own brands, and this is how I've always built Freeheel Life. It's like, you have to do good business principles in business. Like that's just a given, right? So if you have a bunch of line items on a balance sheet, you need to be able to trim out things. But like how we trim out is we're a telemark brand and a telemark business. You trim out within the confines of telemark. What happened in the mid 2000s, and I kind of alluded with the Karhu thing and the acquisition from K2. I mean, it literally eradicated the entire iconic brand out of it as though it didn't matter, And so it's the scale of what can be done. I don't think that telemark can't grow. In fact, I'm completely the opposite. I think it can grow. I think to attract, a lot of people have this philosophy that Well, if we attract these big brands to get back into telemark will be saved. We're going to have access to all the gear. Historically speaking, that is naive. It's not going to happen because it's a line item within their budget sheet that says telemark. And guess where it is in terms of a number of user standpoint? It's at the bottom. So any good business person is going to nix it. It's just going to happen. I could give example after example of how that's happened. And like I just said, all of these companies I just mentioned, how many people knew that those manufacturers made telemark skis? And now we're in a boat where we all use good skis. There's not really a difference in ski. I mean, we're manufacturing, we'll probably hit about 100 skis and literally making them ground all the way up. But what I can guarantee people is that 100% of your money is going to go into telemark. That's how you build the business, right? Like you have to build the users and you have to build the business. But even on that note, like I just got back from picking up my skis from the Backcountry Magazine test. I had 3 pairs of telemark bindings on there and I had 3 pair of AT bindings on there. And you know why? Because it's a good ski. But guess what? Right. It's flipping the script. Like telemark skiers that are purchasing from companies that they think support them is not true. If you're a telemark skier and buy a Black Diamond ski because you thought, well, back in the 90s, they were a telemark brand. Guess what? You're going to buy that Heliocarbon. One, they're not going to warranty it with a telemark mount on it. And 2, 100% of your dollars is not going back into helping grow telemark. You put an AT binding on my ski. I don't know how many people, I mean, hopefully we'll get in that buyer's guide again like we did this year. And I would love people to be like, hey, I'm an alpine skier. You make a good ski. I'm putting AT. And I'll be like, cool, thanks for your money. We're going to put it back to telemark. If people are down for that, I'm all about it. But I think with what you're saying, the resurgence 100% is there if we can solve the problems of access, of equipment, and make sure that the economics work. These aren't going to be large businesses, 2, 3 people. But if telemarketers can learn that they can support inwardly and create their own community of economics, to me, it works. And it might be a long game. I always say, my body of work, I'm going to take it as far as I can. And hopefully someone will pick up that similar philosophy and try to go forward with it. But you have to create the economics to make it continue. And we're sort of tying, I know we're both kind of going on these different tangents, but they all kind of tie together. I think the need and the want is there. We just, I always say the corporatization of skiing, it's so corporate and so large. We can't run the risk of even if they bite on it. Like let's say we get Black Diamond to really start focusing, making skis that work for telemark, and they actually are putting money back into telemark in some way, shape, or form in R&D and advertising, whatever. There's still the risk that they're so big that even if they see the attraction, the bottom line is it could get cut at any time. And that's what I've seen for years and years, and kind of led me on my path. Like we said, I'm like, we need our own brands and we need our own industry. And it's part of what's interesting about you working in media, it's like, I think that's what we've always struggled with telemark is, unlike snowboarding where it makes sense, like, cool, you're going to have your own magazine and obviously it's snowboards, powder wasn't going to cover snowboarding. But it's like, we kind of get lumped into like, well, how do you show that in media to inspire people? And then if they do go buy something, the money doesn't come back in. You know what I mean? So it's, in my opinion, it's all about closing the circle the wagons a little bit, entice people to get into the business knowingly. And I like that you hit on the journalism side, because any business in skiing is relatively small in comparison. Like, don't get into it if you're looking to just cash in right off the bat, or even at all. Like you might be building a job for yourself, and it might be very small. So, anyways, hopefully that adds some insight to it. But I think ski industry as a whole, the big ski industry, alpine ski industry, let's say, or backcountry, AT, whatever, I think telemark, they're too big at this point to even see the benefit of putting money back into telemark over a long period of time, even if they bite on it in the short term.
Yeah, and that's interesting. And I think that's insightful. And I mentioned in the piece that through the grapevine I heard, and there's no guarantee, there's no nothing. I mean, this was through the grapevine. I want to be clear that one of the major ski boot manufacturers is thinking about launching an updated Tele boot, right? And so the idea is, okay, you know, these AT boot manufacturers they produce incredible boots. I've got 10 pairs in my garage. I'm like, okay, which one am I going to choose today? Because like, they're all damn good. The walk mode is amazing. They're all 130s. You know, they're all light. It's like, where do we even go from here? I mean, they're all great boots, but then so all that technology has come forward. The last is going to be completely different. You need the flex point for the boot on the toe, whatever. I mean, there's some challenges, I'm sure, but like, you know, Grilamid, the materials, the buckles, you know, BOA, whatever. I mean, it doesn't seem like a huge leap for a boot company to say. I mean, I know that creating a last is super expensive, is what I've heard. I mean, I know that's a big investment for a company. But you know, I mean, the technology is there, and I'm sure it can be applied. They have super smart engineers, you know, and I would be hopeful that one really great boot or a series of great boots from even just one company would say, you know, and then give, you know, great companies like 22 Designs the ability to then say, okay, well, we're going to like find a way to lighten our bindings, which are incredible and stiff and amazing, but how do we then keep up? I don't know. But yes, I don't know. I mean, I am maybe naive because you're right. Maybe it takes a whole industry, and we're, you know, in terms of backcountry, there are tons of companies. I mean, Dynafit is all about backcountry, you know what I mean? And, Salomon has its both sides, but these companies are putting a lot of weight in, or a lot of energy into, and a lot of money into developing full lines, you know, and there's Backcountry Magazine, which I just am looking at the new issue right now, and shout out to Betsy and her crew. You know, I actually was at that test many years because they used to test backcountry skis for Outside Magazine. It was one of my favorite ski tests. And like, so I don't know, I'm naive, but I just, inside my gut, I'm like, you know what I mean? There's so much opportunity. I mean, and, you know, maybe you're right. Maybe like you're saying, these, you know, companies are running in such a way where it doesn't make sense to start up a whole new line, and the return, you know what I mean? The buyer, it's going to take a while, but it's maybe also just a marketing and branding problem. You know what I mean? Like, why are telemarketers branded as, you know, as bums or whatever, versus just sort of like, again, vinyl, you know what I mean? Vinyl is this thing that everybody's giving away, and it's a thrift store. And now I'm going out and paying $30 for a damn record. You know what I mean? Like, and loving it, you know. And, you know, what about the marketing around telemark? I mean, it's graceful, it's incredible exercise, it's a new challenge. You know what I mean? The equipment is there, and it's going to get even better. You know what I mean? It's like, I mean, we're all on the, I mean, I'm on the sort of like podcast bro, you know, thing now. I'm listening to tons of podcasts, and like, I think someone called it the hedonic treadmill, this idea that we're just like, we're all just moving forward and no one can be blamed for it. You know, we're raising our kids and we're going to jobs and we're doing blah, blah, blah. But like, how do we actually start to think about our lives? How do we think about how to, you know, maximize our lives? And how do we, you know, you and I are middle-aged and, you know, we're not going to be around forever. So how do we like start to think about like what makes our life actually better, and how do we actually want to spend our time? And like, I'm not saying telemark is the first thing that comes to mind, but it's one thing that comes to mind. It gives me great joy. It challenges me. It keeps me fit. Whatever, you know what I mean? I feel great about myself. I mean, if I could telemark for an hour or downhill ski for 6 hours, I'd rather telemark for an hour. You know, I don't know. I mean, here's a maybe you won't get there.
Here's a question for you. Let's say, because everyone brings up the boot, and I've been on that test team for like 7 years, so I can verify that it's going on and likely going to happen. But when people bring up the boot, we talk about this a lot of times, or a series of boots, whatever it is at the point that everyone tends to focus their thinking in terms of backcountry mobility, lighter weight, better range of motion, which totally makes sense. Because a lot of those people got into telemark through backcountry skiing over the last 4 decades, right? So my question to you is, let's say this boot comes out and it's using all of these technologies that you're describing, BOA, Grilamid, whatever, and they get it all right. When you're going out with your AT buddies, are you going to grab your telemark setup with the new boot, or are you going to grab your AT setup?
Great question, and I'm glad you put me on the spot. I mean, yeah, in some days, I mean, I'm a unique person because I'm not skiing super high consequence stuff. I have 4 kids. I haven't done my Abbey 1 refresher in a long time. I know my limits. And so anything I'm going to go ski in the backcountry, I can ski on a telemark setup. So I will actually, I think 50, 60, 70% of the time would probably grab my telemark setup now if it was lighter and the walk mode was better, and you know what I mean, all those things, because it's not going to hold me back with my friends who are fit and on AT stuff, right? I mean, I tried to keep up with AT guys on telemark stuff and just got whatever. It was my own fitness, but I also just got left in the dust because of the gear, I think, in some ways. So I don't know, great question, but yes, are people going to like, you know what I mean? Are they going to be Hendy who's skiing, you know, meteorite off that mountain in Alaska on telegear? You know, I don't know. I mean, that's my hope. I mean, there's some, you included, I mean, there's going to be a ton of incredibly talented, if the marketing, if the branding, if the, you know, if the sales, if the business come through, you can just imagine it, right? You can imagine all these young kids coming up doing incredible things on telemark gear, you know, that bring them incredible enjoyment, and that for, you know, the cinematographers and the magazine journalists, give them something new to write about in an exciting way. But I don't know. It's an whatever. I don't mean this to be a pun, but it is an uphill battle, right? Like, yep. Yes, people are going to be like, why am I going to grab my telly thing? And so I'm curious to hear what you would say.
Yeah, it's interesting. My philosophy is telemark, the data of having a retail shop for 8 years. I mean, when I opened, you know, I just spent the previous whatever 6 or 7 years on the road, and part of me opening a telemark specific shop, people were like, that's never going to work, dude. And I was like, no, I'm pretty sure there's like tens of thousands of us worldwide, maybe even just in the United States. And I was like, there's a need for some sort of retail. And then the next phase of my business is really like, again, manufacturing. You know, that's why I acquired this small business to make stuff. It's why we're making skis ground up. But I have no illusions that telemark is going to grow in the future through the backcountry. It's going to grow in the resort, because you need repetition. You need the ability to do it. And part of what stuck out to me about your article, and I hope people will go read it, you know, it's like, you know, you're in your 40s, you got kids, there's an opportunity to create an additional challenge in that specific scenario. I always say, like, the Midwest, huge telemark scene. I mean, Midwest Telefest this year had 400 people at it from, you know, multiple states. But they have no retail. They have no retail support. They have nothing, you know, and when you do buy from that retail outlet, the money, again, it's not going back to telemark. So I think that it's going to kind of answer your question is like, what are people going to grab to go in the backcountry? There's a small subset. I'm a backcountry skier sometimes. I'm in the resort a lot too. But I think it's not, we have to be careful, like, especially if the boot comes out and it's sort of focused on like getting back to this golden age of telemark, that backcountry skiing grew through telemark. We all understand that up until, you know, 2008. I don't see that happening, only because of the difficulty of the learning curve to do it. Where I do see it growing is small hills. I see it growing with people that are, you know, parents wanting to pick something up, people looking for a craft to hone, you know, and I think that's where it'll grow. And so that's kind of why I was asking you, not to put you on the spot, but just more like, you know, really what it comes down to as a backcountry user, I've always said, like, when people finally got to lock it down with a good tech toe, you got to kind of wonder, like, do people really enjoy the telemark turn enough? Because I'm down to haul a little extra. I haven't put a pair of Alpine skis on since 1993, so I'm probably not the best person to ask, but I'm going to go up because I know I'm going to make telemark turns. That's what I love to do. And sure, I make a great P turn. Any good telemark skier knows how to parallel turn. You know, it's just part of the repertoire, you know? But yeah, so that's my hope, is if and when there's a new boot, we're not so hyper focused on trying to recapture an AT crowd, because I don't think from a personality standpoint and a market standpoint, you're going to get the people. You know, a lot of people might have that telly setup. And going back to an earlier comment you made, when the snow's bad, that's when we see business go up. End of season, springtime, it's hard to get new users, especially young people, to bite on trying something new that's difficult when it's 700-inch year and it's just nuking, you know? So
right.
It's hard. It's a hard sell, you know? So, but when we do see the pick up, you know, we have like a 350 or 400-inch year. Guess who's coming in the shop to rent telemark gear? People that are bored. So right. I think we can feed into that. And I wholly want to see backcountry continue. And to another one of your points is like the media aspect of it. And that's again why I was reaching out to you. It's great to see your philosophy on being a dad, picking up telemark again, dusting it off and going at it. I think that's a fantastic time to do it. And it's cool to see some positive media. Unfortunately, outside of my social media and stuff that we do, there's not a lot of outlets. And I love talking to guys like you because I'm like, I want to tell the story. What path are we on? And if people are willing to write about that, I love it because people would be surprised at how, I think back to the early 2000s. That's why I was asking you about powder. Man, when I was an athlete in the early 2000s, I mean, I did that for 7 years. I was out shooting. I mean, I started when we were shooting slides, you know what I mean? Like, I mean, Dave Reddick at Powder, he would not, Reddick was the photo editor, I believe.
Yeah, Dave.
I mean, he wouldn't even accept digital, first of all. And we used to send so much telemark to that guy. And he's like, we don't publish telemark skiers. And as an athlete, I mean, this is like 2004, 5, 6. I mean, we were putting in the work, dude. And I know we had good shots, but they didn't want to show telemark skiers. Free skiers, same thing. It didn't matter how good we got. They wouldn't publish us. And there was a little bit in skiing and ski, obviously Warren Miller. I mean, and there was some cross referencing there, but I see where the dilemma comes in the media is there's also advertising relationships there. There always has been. And it's a tough sell, man. So my hope is that people will hear the path that telemarketers are on, see the incentive and find ways to write about it, because I really believe it can grow. And if they read an article piece like you and you live in Albuquerque and maybe someone sees you telemarketing, they've got to find a way to get the gear to try it because they're going to have that sense of like, man, that looks badass in the resort. But if they can't find rentals, they can't find a shop to service them and give them expertise, So anyways, there's a lot of pieces that need to get filled in. And I think it's going to grow in the resort 100%. I think that's where it's going to go.
Yeah. And I'll kind of wrap up my piece by saying, great. I mean, I think I'm glad you bring that up about the AT boot. And if, you know what I mean? If you're right, it's the pathway, the entry point is the resort, but so great. Then we don't even need a new boot. You know what I mean? The Scarpa boots right now and the 22 design bindings and the Volley skis or whatever. I mean, again, it's an investment, just like any ski setup is an investment, but it's all there. It's all incredible. You know what I mean? It's all you will make incredible turns. It is all you will ever need to ski is all right there. And then, like I say in the piece, I have a used gear store. Shout out to Regear here in Albuquerque. It's like a football, it's so huge, you know what I mean? But and you say you make your employees do it, challenge yourself. I mean, go into one of these places, wherever it is, hopefully you have a used place in, within an hour or two, and spend $150, $200, which I'm not saying is not nothing, but it's nothing compared to a new setup. And just go out and buy a beat up pair of T1s and whatever the skis are and just go learn the telly turn. You know what I mean? And you'll only last half a day, but damn, it'll be fun. And, whatever it is, you know what I mean? And you're skiing with your kids. So who cares? I mean, your kid's 5 years old and they're wedging down a blue. Like, you know what I mean? You're fine. You know what I mean? You're going to be totally fine. And then, make the investment. Buy from your shop. You know what I mean? Buy your skis, whatever it is. Like, you know what I mean? Like if we're all, I mean, I'll end with this, but there's this, I'm on the podcast thing now, a little late, sort of self-help, but this book I'm reading called Die with Zero. And this idea of we're all going to die and if we don't want to die with a ton of money. We want to leave our kids some money. We want to leave some money for retirement or whatever. But I'm 40, when I'm 60, I mean, telemarketing is going to be that much harder. I should be telemarketing right now. You know what I mean? My knees are going to give out, you know what I mean? So great. I'm going to make the investment. I mean, that's a very middle-class thing to say, but let's go. You know what I mean? Let's do it. Go for it. So anyway, I'm glad your shop exists. I'm glad this podcast exists. I'm glad, you know what I mean? And I want nothing more than for it to continue to grow, man. I mean, that's my hope.
Yeah, I love it. Well, I think that's a good place to wrap, dude. I want everybody to go read your article. I'll put a link in the show notes. Everyone should own a telemark setup and by Jacob Schiller. And dude, thanks so much for coming on the podcast, man. I really appreciate your insights and it was super fun talking to you.
Thanks for having me. This is all, bouncing around in my brain. So it's super fun to talk to somebody who understands it all and is insightful as yourself. And, I wish you the best and, let's go ski together.
Love that, man. Thanks a lot. Talk to you soon.
All right. See you, buddy.
Okay. I hope that was a good one for everyone out there. I had a great time talking to Jacob. super interesting conversation. And I always love getting into these talks with different folks, just understanding how people get into telemark, what they're doing now. I think Jacob's got a really unique perspective on things too. And I'm glad he's so optimistic, as I think most of us are, that telemark will continue to grow. And, I think his article really kind of brings up this idea of maybe some of the catalysts, like pulling the old tele skis out to learn while you're teaching your kids or whatever. Maybe you're bored of your area. There's a lot of reasons, but I think it was a good conversation. I think we touched on a lot of things, and I'm waiting for that new boot to come out, because I definitely would like to get out and do some backcountry skiing with Jacob, and hopefully we can make that happen down in the beautiful state of New Mexico. Well, before we take off, be sure to sign up for the mailing list. We're going to keep that going into this week to keep you updated on what's left in the retail space. And of course, if anything exciting happens over the summer, we'll definitely reach out via email, and working hard to get everybody on there so that we kind of have a centralized point to keep you in the loop about all things Free Heel Life. You can check out freeheellife.com. You can find Free Heel Life all over the social medias at Free Heel Life. You can catch me on Instagram and Facebook at Josh Nomadson, or in our Facebook group under the title of Free Heel Life. And great place to get some information. But looking forward to next week. We got one more episode left, and then I am on sabbatical. I just like to use that word, right? It sounds it's a snazzy word. But I'm taking a break, and I'll be gone over the summer and working on some other projects, and looking forward to that as well. But you can catch me next week, same place and more or less the same time. And we'll have the last podcast of the season. But until then, friends, I hope you have some great turns this week. And spread telemark always. See you later.